Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartone.
We are Spark Partners. We help you to grow by understanding trends and how to use them to run your business and actually to run your life. A lot of what we talk about is more than just business dealings, in that business and life sort of blend together. And, I just recently purchased a diesel pickup because I enjoy going camping, and it's got a camper on it and the whole 9 yards. And I thought about the implications of electric vehicles. We've got the Rivian out there that's an electric truck. We've got the F-150 that's electrified as well. And for where I am right now in my life, I decided not to buy an electric vehicle because I'm going on multi-day excursions where there's no charging systems in place. And so I wanted to bring this topic to light, as we always talk about what's coming next. And, if you're not going to be riding the wave, then you might as well just sit on the beach. So let's talk about that, Adam. And one thing before I start, I just learned that the first electric vehicle, take a guess as to when it debuted in the world.
Oh, I would guess like in the 1940s.
Guess again, 1890.
1890. Oh my God.
A gentleman named William Morrison, a chemist from Des Moines, Iowa, created a vehicle that was a commercial vehicle that was able to carry 6 passengers, had a top speed of 14 miles an hour. And that was the initial electrified wagon, as they called it. It never was a commercial success for a lot of reasons, but it just made me think that this idea of commercial vehicle or of electric vehicles has been around for a long time. So with that, I'm going to pitch it to you, Adam, and get your thoughts on the electrification of, I think we'll start with vehicles, but we'll go beyond that because they've got to be plugged into something.
Okay. That surprised me. I wonder, I didn't even know they had batteries back in those days. So I wonder if he had that hooked up to, like with he used to do the electric streetcars. Maybe he hooked to the overhead lines. I wonder. I have to do some research on that. That's fascinating. We talk frequently here about how the world changes, and then how slowly people will react to it. And, we talked about the internet, for example. When it first came along, a lot of people didn't think that it was going to make that big of a deal in the way, create a lot of change in their life or the way they did business. But in fact, none of us could live today if we, without it. It's endemic in our lives. And we talk about how there's certain things that happen that create a punctuated equilibrium when you slip over to the side. And I think people don't realize what's been happening in the world of electrification. And I think we're going to find that the EV was the start of a punctuated equilibrium and changing the way that we work and live. So originally there was, obviously, we can go back, as you said, to the early 1900s, and there was no electricity. And certainly the part of the world I was from had very little electricity. And the first big wave was electrifying America. And we had these projects called like the Tennessee Valley Authority, where they came in and, that one was famous because they built a big dam, flooded out a lot of homes of poor people. And it was fought tooth and nail by people who said they'd rather live in the shack than have electricity. But the Rural Electric Cooperative Movement, the REC movement, paid for largely by the federal government in conjunction with state and local taxes, led to the creation of the electrified America, where everywhere you went, you had that outlet, you could plug stuff in. And certainly by the time we got to 1960, you were electrified everywhere that you wanted to go. And that created a tremendous boon and a tremendous opportunity for growth. And we electrified, and everybody's house then had light bulbs, and we had electric appliances and everything that became part of the modern world. And we got used to that. But what we need to remember is that was a particular kind of infrastructure. What we said was we're going to go build a plant that makes electricity. We have some kind of a turbine that makes electricity. And they're going to pump it out on the lines to everybody's house, right? And so at first, they were fairly small plants. And even a small town like the one you grew up in, I'm sure had its own electric plant a long time ago. So towns of 2,000 to 3,000 people would have electric plants. And then we realized, well, it made sense to have bigger and bigger and bigger plants, and the small ones would shut down, and we would transmit it much longer. So we broke up between production of electricity and transmission of electricity. So, how do we make it, and then how far do we send it? And of course, that led to these giant hydroelectric plants, Niagara Falls, for example, and of course, the nuclear plants, which could generate huge amounts of electricity and send it for hundreds of miles. But that's what we got used to, was this sort of centralized production, long waves of transmission, and there was lots of fallout. There was failures. I don't know. I grew up with electricity going out on a regular basis. Perhaps you did too. We still see it in parts of the world, and certainly we see it like in California with wildfires, which take down electric areas for long periods of time. Now we're going through this really, really new big change. And the new big change is to think about how we make and use electricity in a much more decentralized grid way of going forward. And that is now starting to be driven by the EV. So, and what I mean by that is, if you aren't familiar, as you said, the Ford F-150 Lightning, very popular. Ford has orders for 200,000 F-150 electric F-150 Lightnings, but they're only able to make 2,000 to 2,400 a month. So even if you'd wanted one of those, you wouldn't have got one this year. So you didn't have much of a choice. But we now know that you can buy an inverter, and people that have that vehicle, whenever they have a power outage, they plug their vehicle into their house, and it will power your house between 3 and 11 days. Depending upon how you use your electricity. For example, if you say, well, okay, I'm going to not run my dryer, and you cut back on some of the pleasures of life, you can get 11 days out of it. So we've had a lot of stories this winter of people who have been able to use their EV, and now the trucks have the biggest battery packs, so they last the longest. But your car can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so what we're moving towards is this world in which you'll say, okay, I have the ability to generate electricity at my home with my solar panel. And then I can use that solar panel to power my car. Now, I can also have a Tesla Powerwall in my house, and I can power up the Powerwall. Then what could happen is you can say, well, okay, if I have a power outage, though, not only am I making electricity and putting it into the batteries, but the battery packs will put it back into my house. Now think about that in a grid where you have this and your neighbor has it and all of your neighbors have it, right? Or let's even say half your neighbors have it. What we could do is we could produce enough electricity in a small area so that we can then make the electricity, put it into the cars, bring it back again. And what that then gets us towards is effectively almost free electricity. It's kind of like the telephone. For a long time, there was no telephone. Then we had a telephone, and telephony was expensive. People had one phone in their house. And if you made a call very far from your house, you had to use long distance, a term.
Right. And it was a pay thing. Yeah, I remember that.
Remember, if you called locally, you dialed 7 digits. If it was within your area code, it was a 7-digit call. So, 10-digit call was a long-distance call. Now, all calls are 10-digit calls, right? We've gone that direction. But all calls are free. Now we don't pay anything for calling. It costs me the same to talk to you in Tucson as it would cost me to talk to somebody 2 houses down. That's where we're headed with electricity. It's going to be that same sort of a system, and it's going to be very redundant. So now what happens is if there's a bad storm that goes through my area, well, then what happens is that'll back up to another area, right? So that whenever there's not electricity produced in my area, it'll be produced in another area. But at the same time, what we'll do is if your car's in the driveway, it'll be plugged in all the time. When the bad weather comes through, then it'll use your car to feed back into your house, to feed back into the grid. And that's a fundamental change, and that's happening. And the big issue is because of the EVs. By having the electric vehicles become popular, we can start to plan on them, and you start to promote it. You can start saying, well, if an electric company, let's take California, for example, which has all these problems with wildfires, hasn't built an electric plant in years and years and years. Nobody wants a nuclear plant. What they can start saying is, oh, look, you know what? We need more power. They've been giving incentives to put solar panels on your home. Then it becomes beneficial to the power company to say, hey, maybe I'll give you an incentive on an electric vehicle, right? And what we need to do is anticipate that this is the way we're headed. I keep telling people you need to start thinking about a world with free electricity going forward. And the big part of this is because your car is now a place that makes electricity, retains electricity, can put out electricity.
Right.
And
I think
it makes you it improves on that big trend of mobility that we've talked about before, and allowing you to be connected up to other people. Just a couple little interesting bits. One out of every 10 cars sold in the United States is an EV, which people 5 years ago said wouldn't happen, but we're already at 1 in 10. State of California has now outlawed the use of gasoline-powered yard appliances.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. You lawnmowers and leaf blowers and all that sort of thing. You can't do those 2-cycle engines like you do most part of the country.
So what happened? I mean, you just can't use them at all, or
Right.
is it a grandfathered in kind of thing? If you have one,
Well,
you can use it.
I think if you powered one in your yard, that's not illegal, but you can't buy them. Nobody can sell them. If you
Interesting.
go to buy something, you have to. They're all electric. Now that's kind of fascinating because if you go to the Home Depot or a Lowe's in a town in California, you'll find out that there's a lot of variety. I mean, they make these kinds of appliances come in a lot of different. These yard appliances come in a lot of different configurations: 1 battery, 2 batteries, different size batteries,
Yeah.
depending upon how large a yard you have and how much you're going to use the thing. And it's pushing us in this whole direction of getting away from the dependence on the fossil fuels because actually it becomes cheaper. So, for example, I now have an electric mower. I've done that. I did it 2 years ago. I didn't have a lawnmower at all in Nevada. I never had a need for one. When I started working on this second house in California, I needed something. I went and got an electric. And I have to tell you, it wasn't any more expensive than a gasoline. And, of course, I don't have to pay for any gasoline. And the other thing is I don't have to worry about the gasoline going bad, which used to happen to me all the time. I'd buy 2 gallons of it, and I wouldn't use it, and it would go bad. It would gum up inside of the carburetor of the lawnmower. And I'm out there trying to clean the thing out and get the thing working again. And I'm sitting there pulling on it, and the spark plugs get fouled out because I don't do any maintenance on it. And now I just plug the battery in, and the lawnmower runs. And I bought a pretty cheap one, so I only get about 30 minutes. But that's okay because then I can go have a cocktail.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I think that one of the things that
EVs now,
yeah, I think one of the things that people fail to realize is that everything's interconnected. And especially when it comes to business and trends, and we talked about the personal life and all that. The big challenge is, and the big opportunity is the idea of energy storage. And so you kind of mentioned some of the elements. You've got solar on your rooftop.
Yeah.
You've got your Tesla in the garage. You might have a power wall in your garage as well on the side of the house. But there's lots of other companies that are actually going towards that, including a friend of mine owns a company, or is actually CEO of a company called Storen. And you can look them up at storen.tech. I think I'd like to have him on the next podcast, Adam, the more I think about this.
Okay.
Because what John can really help to explain is what's happening in the world of energy storage. And energy storage comes in lots of different ways. We hear about the power wall, and there's different kinds of quote unquote batteries and fuel cells that he'll be able to really help to understand the nuances and the implications. And what's interesting about what's happening is lawmakers are having a hard time keeping up with what's happening in the world. And we've talked about this in the past, where there's just challenges between what the municipalities are doing, what the state of California is doing, and of course, in your own backyard, what are your politicians doing to help or hinder the proliferation of electric vehicles and the way that the grid is changing?
I was a fan of Tesla after the second or third year of their production because I realized that they sold every single car they made. And while the leadership and the Detroit auto companies disliked my articles dramatically in Forbes, the reality was that, you could see that every time Tesla made a car, they sold all of them. And it just struck me that people really wanted that. And so one of the interesting statistics about this is that investments in EV plants, the production of full electric cars, from 2015 to 2018 ran between $0 and $5 billion. I mean, literally zero investment in EV plants to $5 billion, nothing. But by 1921, we had the investment rate was $25 billion. In 22, $74 billion was put into the production of EV plants. And this is a phenomenon related to punctuated equilibrium that I try to describe to people, which is that when a new technology comes along, it transitions much quicker than you expect. And the reason is that let's look at what's happening in automobiles. There were people who 5, 6, 7 years ago were working on improvements in the internal combustion engine, how to get more power out of it with less fuel, induction systems, intake systems, managing exhaust systems, all kinds of ways to try to improve, the performance of a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. But what happened was when the punctuated equilibrium happened and we started to get over this other side, we started to see that people really wanted these cars. Ford announces the Mustang Mach-E. They announced the F-150. The orders come pouring in. We start seeing people buying the Chevy Bolt, even though the batteries are catching fire. Then what happens is the transition occurs. And if you're working in an auto company, you quit investing. Even if you had ideas and plans, you were thinking about, hey, I'm going to bring out this updated engine that I'm going to put into the car. You stop saying, whoa, stop. Don't put money in that because the market's headed in a different direction. And you shift you transition, shift over your resources into the fast growing thing. So what we see is for the longest time, there's no investment in the new technology. And then it shifts. Then kind of think about computers. I'm old. Enough that I can remember when corporations ran their payroll and everything on mainframe computers. They sat in the basement on a raised floor, air-conditioned room. There was raised floor because there was all these wires underneath. Big, giant computers, had to have it kept at 65 degrees so the computer didn't overheat. That was the way people got computing done. And if you went and talked to somebody in the what wasn't called IT, it was called data processing department, and you talk about, changes in computing, they'd be like, never going to happen, never going to happen. Mini computers came along, and people kind of like, well, those are okay. They're basically mainframes for smaller companies. We'll kind of see. But the PC came along and they were all like, forget about it. That's not a computer. That's a toy. It's never going to make inroads into the world, into the corporate world. Then what happened was we started seeing pop up in people's desks, right? Like we'd see a secretary, the CEO secretary get one because she could turn her emails. She could turn around letters or memos for the CEO much more quickly using this PC than she could do trying to log into the mainframe data processing system to generate the letter. You'd see some guy in finance come up with a PC because instead of having to write a big code to do some analytics on the mainframe, he could do it in a spreadsheet on his PC. And so we started seeing a few of them, and the people in data processing hated them. They rejected them. They wanted rules against using them. But as you saw the productivity and the use, what happened was it shifts. And the people in the corporations, the CEO starts saying, why am I giving the DP department hundreds of thousands of dollars for that mainframe? What would it cost if we changed over to this PC like I see these little companies doing, right? And they quit investing in the expensive and they start investing in the new. And that shift has now happened. As I said, we went from 2018, literally was zero in 2018 in EV plants to 25 billion in 21 to 75 billion in 22. We now see that transition is happening. And that's why punctuated equilibriums happen so quickly and we get to a new normal so quickly is because of the way the investment rates shift over so very, very fast. Now we're also seeing the backup piece of that. So you talked about range anxiety. That's the technical term for being afraid you're going to run out of electric power, right? Well, we now have an announcement that Tesla has agreed that it's going to open up its charging world, 7,400 stations to everybody before the end of 2024. So we're going to get to where all cars can use all charging stations. It would be just like today. We can drive your car to any gas station and fill it up. You'll be able to use all these charging stations. Plus, we've also agreed that we're going to put $500 million into the additional charging stations over the next 3 years. That was part of the act that got passed by Congress in the Biden administration. So what we're going to see is we're going to go from fear, range anxiety to they're going to be, plug-in outlets everywhere, right? And in fact, we'll be able to put them in remote locations like you're talking about for your camping with a solar panel on them and put batteries into them. And you'll come in, you'll plug in, and you'll do a battery transfer, they'll come out of the battery, not necessarily real time out of the solar, but you'll be able to get, your power update that you want, even sitting in Yosemite National Park or sitting in one of the beautiful national parks or state parks in the state of Arizona. And so you're not going to be you're not going to be worried about whether or not you can get power. Now, is that not going to happen in 23? You're going to go camping this year, so it's not there yet. But what we're seeing is there's now committed to it. Okay, the law's been passed, money's been allocated. We now see this deal made between Tesla. That was just announced this week. Just announced that they're going to make their network available. So now we see the underlying backfill of the infrastructure coming along, filling it in. And we're seeing, so all this electrification is happening in your home, happening in your car. Now, all of a sudden, it's starting to move much more quickly. And we start to see more support for it. A report came out this week that they were able to take and look at the number of electric vehicles per 100,000 people, and then they correlated that to respiratory illness. So you could take a city like Phoenix, you could take Los Angeles, you could take any major city where they had data on fairly good data on respiratory illnesses, including asthma. And they said, okay, here's how many we report year after year after year after year. And then they started seeing EVs come along, and they've now been able to say for every increase of 20 EVs per 1,000 people. So if you add 20 per 1,000, you get a 4.5% reduction in respiratory illness.
That's remarkable.
Drop off in asthma attacks and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, so you remember during the pandemic, during the shutdown, I think it was Los Angeles County reported, blue skies and clear. And same thing with a lot of places in China that were historically just gloom and doom. We're now seeing the resurgence of blue sky and clean skies. Yeah, it's true. Let's talk about the downside or the worry about this. The worry about this of batteries. If your battery catches fire in a Tesla, the average time to put the fire out is 4 hours. There was one that last week caught fire in San Jose, California. A guy was driving down the street with his children. He was driving down the highway with his children. He saw smoke come out from where the battery was located. He pulled off to the side of the road, took his family out. The car caught on fire. And it literally took 4 hours to put it out. And I did some research and found out that's the norm. When these batteries burn, they're just almost impossible to put out. What causes the burning?
They don't. Well, it's a problem with the battery itself. It's why they tell you can't carry a lithium-ion battery onto an airplane, for example. Right? Is that these things the chemistry in them somehow the chemistry with electromagnetism and the physics of it they can catch fire. And again, I'm not scientist enough to be able to explain it. But every time one happens, they learn a little more, and it becomes less likely to happen. But it is a 4-hour fire, and obviously, if you're caught into it, it's extraordinarily deadly. So that's a bad thing. So what does that tell us? Well, for this to continue to go forward is going to involve an awful lot of investment in batteries, right? Because we've got to improve that battery capability. I think I mentioned earlier, Chevy Bolt had a whole bunch of these in 21 and 22, and they ended up stopping production for 6 months at Chevrolet. Then they changed the battery. They went back and gave everybody who bought a Bolt between 2017 and 21 all got new batteries, and then they went back into production again. So we're going to see some of these. I think it's a legitimate problem. I don't want to say that it's not, but we're starting to attack it. And we've seen that investments are going that way as well. So today we have what are called LFP batteries, which stand for lithium, iron, and phosphate, or lithium-ion batteries, right? We're in the midst of right now at the beginning of a conversion to what are called NMC batteries, which are nickel, manganese, and cobalt. These are going to be a lot cheaper to make and a lot less risky. So we're going to see a transition over the next couple of years to a new technology in batteries. The second thing is that there were 15, even though we're going to do this transition, in the last year, there was a commitment to 15 new plants to build lithium-ion batteries. $40 billion has been committed to battery production in 2022 alone. These are all going to be located in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia. They're now
some Rust Belt direction there.
Yeah, so kind of think about this north-south belt from Michigan that runs down, like I said, runs down through Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, down towards Georgia. Now, that has implication. Now, all that $40 billion will generate about 10,000 jobs, so it's not a big job creator, but it is a good economic creator because you're making all these batteries which are going to get sold. One gigafactory, which we're talking about 15 gigafactories here, one gigafactory can make enough batteries for between 10 and 20,000 electric vehicles. So we scale that up by 15, right? So we're going to be making an awful lot of batteries. That's going to be very good for the economy. So think about how places you've thought about that have maybe not benefited from the tech revolution. Yeah. And think about how the auto industry got attacked by the Germans and by the Japanese, and and the U.S. auto industry suffered. Now we're seeing the opportunity to take the lead again. The opportunity in EV vehicles. We're at the forefront. Tesla was first, but the Americans are at the head of this game. We're ahead of the Chinese. We're ahead of everybody else in this game. And what it's going to do is it's going to create economic value in a part of the country that kind of felt like it got left out. back for so many years, right? So that battery belt, including Kentucky and Tennessee, is going to get to benefit from this quite a bit. So the implications start to become pretty far-reaching for how this electrification is going to change, right? You're going to have manufacturing in Wisconsin and Minnesota where they're going to be making blades for wind turbines. You're going to be seeing manufacturing in California and Arizona and Nevada and New Mexico for solar panels. So it's going to be good for the economy. Yeah. Some of the left out places are going to get some good stuff out of this thing, and we're going to attack that problem of whether or not the batteries catch fire. Because, like I said, we hit that inflection point. We went over it. Now we're looking at big investments, and we're looking at shifting to new technologies and things that are going to work better.
Yeah, and I think it behooves business owners and executives and strategists and people that are in business today or looking to start something to consider the bigger play here, that things are changing. Don't be a laggard in this whole shift over. It's not to say, I mean, there's going to be cottage industries. I think the gasoline-powered engines are not going to go away fully for a long time because of enthusiasts and all that. But from a giant economic behemoth perception, I mean, it's going to be electric vehicles in the next 10 years and beyond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Predicting the complete death of anything is difficult. There's still people with VHS tapes in their houses. For something to completely go away, but for something to become pretty much irrelevant is different. Vinyl records, for example, did not go away. I still have a turntable. I'm an old guy. I got old records. I still like to play them. So it's not gone away, but it's tiny. I mean, it's not really relevant. The vinyl record business is really relevant. As we go down this path, and people are going to be having more and more EVs, demand for gas stations is going to decline. That's one of the first ones we're going to see. So all these gas pumps that are sitting out there pumping out, like that, they depend. The store depends on you to come in and buy gas to then go buy a Coke or beer or cigarettes or whatever else, right? We're going to start seeing that change, and those gas stations are going to go away. Then what's going to happen is the people that have the gas-powered cars are going to start having road range anxiety. Because it's like, wow, where's the gas station going to be that I can get the gasoline? Right. And especially if they've got a better performing car. A lot of German cars require that you use the 93 octane gasoline, right? So you have to have the super, the old ethyl, and that might be harder to get yet. And so people say, it's such a hassle, maybe I should go ahead and transition. And in fact, one people ask me what I think about this at a personal level, and what I've been telling them is that, I have a very nice gasoline-powered car. It's a German car, and I'm going to drive that until it dies. Because right now, the most economical thing I could do is just do the maintenance on it and let that thing wear itself out. Every year, electronic vehicles are going to get better. Think about the early PCs. Remember how fast we went from PCs that could do little, they kept doing more and more and more and more for a decade. Every year, it was just dramatic improvement in a PC. That's what we can anticipate now in EVs. And it's kind of like if you need to get a car, you're kind of right now on that cusp. Do I want to get an EV or do I not want to get an EV? And my point of view is if somebody smashed my car tomorrow and I didn't have a choice, I would go get an EV today. But the best thing for me is if I can cripple along for another 4, 5, 6 years with this gas-powered car, the cost of my insurance is going to go down because it's old. I'll maintain it, but I won't be investing in something new. And then what happens is when it eventually either dies or somebody runs into it and I have to get a new car, hopefully I'll be able to buy the newest, latest EV at that point in time. And I think that's something that people should keep in mind if they're thinking about buying a vehicle.
Very well said, Adam. This has been a very exciting conversation about the electrification of the vehicles and the infrastructure. And I think that as a business owner, you've got to keep this in mind. And certainly you can always reach out to Adam and I, Manny at sparkpartners.com, Adam at sparkpartners.com as well. With that, Adam, what are your final thoughts before we log off for today's podcast?
I think people need to realize that we are in the transition. Okay, with the punctuated equilibrium has begun. We are moving towards an electrified marketplace. And in your business, if you're thinking about delivery vehicles, if you're thinking about putting solar panels on your business, all those kinds of decisions, really don't pay someone past. Think about where it's going. Think about what electric rate's going to be like. Think about future technology. Make those decisions based upon where we're going to be 5, 6, 7 years. If you look backwards, you're going to make a bad decision.
Very well said, Adam. And with that, we'll talk with you next week. I'll try to get John Davis, the CEO of Storen, to join us on the next time. And we'll have a conversation with an expert in what's happening with the residential as well as commercial energy storage. So take care, Adam.
Thank you.